As we move to a consideration of the American church, for a long time, there wasn't much difference uh, between what the English church had experienced and expressed itself in the American church. We just found ourselves in a different place. But after the Revolutionary War, of course, we had to reestablish um, how we were going to be. And a lot of that stayed pretty much the same. We had, strong Anglican presence in several of the colonies, Virginia in particular, but certainly in some of the others. And life moved on pretty much under the English model. What really began to set things going in a different way, of course, was the question of abolition and then the Civil War. And unlike some of the other denominations, um, the Episcopal Church didn't really split um, during the Civil War. There was a body, just for governance reasons primarily, in the South that established itself as the Protestant Episcopal Church of the Confederate States of America. Uh, and it was short-lived, of course, because it only existed as long as the Civil War did. Whereas in some of the other denominations, those splits lasted much longer. But we don't like schism. Episcopalians don't like schism, and this is, of course, a problem because sometimes the world demands that we take a stand on the side of right, and we don't necessarily want to do that. We would rather deal with heresy than schism. Or in the case of the Civil War, we didn't want to split. We kind of let the churches go in their separate ways. As an Episcopal church in the United States, the Episcopal Church didn't take a strong stand. The Southern body said, yeah, slavery's right. It's part of God's plan. When they came back, they had to rethink that. So, despite the fact that the Episcopal Church as a whole didn't take strong opposition, individuals did, and so it's a mixed bag, as it is now, and it has been throughout our history. Is that the church moves slowly, and there are going to be prophets out in front who are going to call us to a new vision, to a new world. And one of the things that did emerge from the Civil War was a statement from the House of Bishops because of all of the carnage of some of the battles. And I'm just going to quote, and this is, I use these Church's Teaching series, get this right, there it is, all the time. This is pretty good. So, Christian Social Witness by Harold Lewis. And there was, like I said, there was a pastoral letter that came out of the House of Bishops in the North after some of the bloody battles of the Civil War. And so, and Lewis points out here that the letter contains 4 pieces that are central to Episcopal Church social teaching. And I bring those to you because I think that he's right on. And so I'm just going to quote here, and this is on page 55 of this book. First, the text emerges, and they're talking about Romans 13:1, where you need to be subject to the authorities. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. And this is a call for union, and listen to what's going on, because this was coming from the North. But the text emerges from and addresses a particular context or situation. That is, it theologizes in response to a specific condition in society rather than simply promulgating generic social truths. So here's the difference between social justice and how we implement this, as opposed to larger theological ethical questions like creation, or the things that we dealt with last week. So first, text emerges from and addresses a particular context or situation. Second, it appeals to Scripture as the norm and point of reference, and we know that that can be problematic. Third, it cites the teachings of the prayer book. Now, here aren't we Anglican? Look at the prayer book. It contains so much Scripture. It contains so much tradition. It contains so much reason. It is a good distillation of how we think. And fourth, it presents a, quote, church type, unquote, understanding of the relationship between the denomination and the American government, a recognition that the Episcopal Church ought to be the guardian of the public morality of its nation. In other words, this letter signaled the initial effort on the part of the Episcopal Church to envision itself as other than a chaplaincy to special interest groups within its own constituency. And Lewis says, in this case, the Southern planter class. Instead, the bishops saw the church as an advocate for the interests of all its members and, by extension, for the whole society in which it lived. That goes back to Hooker. It goes back to Jesus. Who are we advocating for? We aren't just advocating for the people in power. We are advocating for those who have no advocate. We are here for the whole of society. So that was sort of the beginning of good social teaching in the Episcopal Church in the United States, building upon certainly the centuries prior to that. And as the socialists arose in England, we had the social gospel arise here in the United States. Later on, characterized by the acronym FOGBOM, F-O-G-B-O-M, the fellowship of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. Yes, that's the language. And the sense that church and society, or theology and science, or religion and culture, all of these are complementary, but they're all there to help us deal with the problems that we face in society as a result of industrialization and expansion and all of those kinds of things. We are responsible for addressing social ills that arise as we progress. And the last meditation hymn comes out of that tradition. So that gets us to how we've worked on issues in this country. And I hope you'll have a class, if you haven't already, have a class on a history of Anglicanism, or at least or the church in the United States, and you'll see this. And then, of course, a lot of this you might recall from your own experience. We have gone through so many social upheavals, from civil rights through the ordination of women, the place and role of women in the church, to questions of same-sex relations, same-sex unions, whether or not homosexual persons should be ordained. We have gone through these, and it hasn't been easy. So I want to summarize, and then I want to move on to something entirely, well, not entirely different, but a little bit different in the next little piece. But just to summarize the whole thinking about social teaching is, one, for Episcopalians, it's incarnational. We are Jesus's body. God became human in Jesus, and we are the extension of that. So the material is part of who and what we have to deal with. We do not just exist out here. We live in the world, and we need to deal with the problems of the world. We are involved in what goes on around us. We can't stand aloof and only say, well, I'm just here to take care of the people who come to church on Sunday. We have to be involved in the ongoing workings out of God's vision for us, that we restore humanity in relationship with God. This is infused in our worship life. The appeal to the prayer book. We hear it in the prayers. We see it in the prayers. But that because we have this history, this tradition, and scripture, we use our reason. We're not going to come to a consensus. Civil War certainly showed that. But I don't think that we're ever going to find a place where we are unified, and we'll see schisms as much as we abhor them, because that's the nature of how we think and how we work. We hope that we're unified around certain things, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stay unified forever on matters that hit close to the heart, close to the wallet, close to our psyches. It's not a simple thing, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be there working on it. The fact that it's hard doesn't mean that we shouldn't be